Targeted multiple cities in Israel overnight, with Bat Yam hit the hardest. Rescue teams continue to search for survivors in the Tel Aviv suburb. At least 14 Israelis have been killed in the past 3 days of conflict. In Iran, meanwhile, the death toll is at 80 people since Friday. 2 fuel depots near Tehran were damaged overnight. Israel has also hit the cities of Shiraz and Isfahan in central and southern Iran. It's issued threats for Iranians to evacuate if they're living near military facilities.
Another morning of explosions across Iran, this one during rush hour in the central city of Isfahan. The provincial headquarters of the Ministry of Defense was struck by Israel. Plumes of smoke are rising from oil facilities in Shiraz and the capital, Tehran. It's day 3 of Israel's attacks. And Iran's top diplomat is warning of further retaliation if Israel doesn't stop.
It
is a response to the Israeli attacks and violations. Once these attacks stop, we will reciprocate. We were engaged in rounds of negotiations with the US. The 6th round of talks was supposed to be held in Oman. The Zionist entity is not willing to see us reaching an agreement or a diplomatic solution with the United States.
Overnight, Iran struck Israel with multiple waves of missiles and drones. There were several direct hits on the cities of Haifa and Tel Aviv. Israeli citizens were told to seek shelter through the night as Iran and Yemen responded to Israel's attacks. Israel's advanced air defense systems could not stop all the rockets and missiles. On Saturday, Israel launched more attacks targeting Iran's critical energy infrastructure. As night fell, an oil depot near the capital, Tehran, was hit and caught fire. Satellite images revealed the impact of Israel's earlier strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. As missiles continue to land in both countries, calls by international leaders for calm have not been able to halt the conflict. Sama bin Javid, Al Jazeera.
Huge amount of confrontation that goes on between the two countries. We have seen so far explosions, activation of air defense system in the past 2 days across the country, including here in capital, where we saw 2 overnight attacks to 2 of the oil depots of the country, one in the western part of the capital, in Shahran, and the other one, if you can see it behind me, in the southern parts of Tehran, we've got another oil depot being attacked by the Israelis. And the Iranian refinery is said to be fully functioning. We had the similar reports from Isfahan, where an attack happened to one Ministry of Defense facility, saying that there is a possibility of casualties coming out of that scene. Also, we've got the report from the refinery of Isfahan saying that the energy infrastructures there has not been damaged. The same report came from the Iran, from the Tehran refinery center, but still we are dealing with a lot of different developments. First, It was Abbas Araghchi, as you mentioned, coming out live today with different statements saying that Iran is going to continue as long as Israelis continue their military strikes. But one last point I wanted to share with you, if I may, is this headline by Kayhan newspaper saying that we're going to finish the war and we're going to finish Israel together. This is very interesting, showing the rhetoric that is here in Tehran.
Right. I was going to ask you about, the reaction and how concerned Iranians are, given that Israel has also been issuing a forced displacement order to Iranian civilians to leave their homes if they live in the vicinity of weapons sites. How concerned are people about this?
Very concerned indeed, because we've got this initial reports that Israelis are targeting military and nuclear sites at the very beginning. But later on, it turns out that it's not just the military sites, it's not just the nuclear facilities that are under the attack. We saw civilian infrastructures, we saw energy infrastructures, and we saw buildings not related to actually military complexes or military or weapon companies, but very buildings that belong to ordinary citizens, including one that belonged to university professors here in the capital. We were there to cover the story, and we saw that the attack they just targeted these buildings in which Iranian top nuclear scientist Dr. Tehranchi was assassinated alongside with his wife, and several civilians. Footages are coming out showing that women and children are being killed as a result of these strikes. There is a funeral scheduled for Tuesday, and according to a state TV report, at least in one of these scenes under strike, at least 20 children have been killed. So people are pretty much aware of the very fact that this is not a nuclear or military-related set of strikes, but indeed, regardless of whatever comes from the Israeli side as their statements, the matter of let's say story is that people are aware that the Israelis are going to attack any target possible.
Okay, Tawhid, thank you for bringing us the latest there from Tehran. Tawhid Asadi. Let's find out what's been happening.
Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, the occupied Palestinian territory. The people in those countries are directly impacted, economically impacted. The oil prices are up. The airspace in Iraq has been shut down since Friday, in Syria as well, and as in Lebanon. In Jordan, it's been on and off during the night hours when Iran usually launches its ballistic missiles. The airspace is closed. This is extremely disruptive. The border crossing between Jordan and the occupied West Bank was also closed. It's beginning to see a bit of activity, although the occupied West Bank is under shutdown. All of those things on the minds, of course, no doubt, of the governments here who are watching new normals being established in the region, none that they would like to see established and entrenched as the new way of doing business in the region, and hence the expectation and the calls really for intervention to de-escalate rather than to encourage an all-out escalation in the region.
No, thank you very much, Ed. The U.S. had nothing to do with the attack on Iran tonight. If we're attacked in any way, shape or form by Iran, the full strength and might of the U.S. armed forces will come down on you at levels never seen before, he says. However, we can easily get a deal done between Iran and Israel and end this bloody conflict. Let's bring in Shihab Ratanzi. The situation between Iran and Israel escalates. Tehran has threatened to attack US, French and British bases if those countries help Israel against Iranian strikes. Let's bring in Rory Challen.
Or a no to that question. He said these are obviously operational decisions and the situation is ongoing and developing, and therefore I'm not going to get into the precise details. What he did say, though, was that the UK is already sending further support in military terms to the region, to its air bases in the region. These are fast jets and refueling aircraft, which he said are going to provide contingency support in that region. Now, he said that he would always make the right decision for the UK, and clearly these comments were coming in response to the threats that Iran had made to the UK, among others, that if they help Israel out, their military bases, military assets will be targeted in the area. And the UK does have military bases. It's got one in Qatar, it's got one in the UAE, and it's got one in Oman, at least. So I think the UK, Keir Starmer, is taking that threat quite seriously.
Thank you, Rory, for that. Rory Challenge in London.
Another message that Iran has sent diplomatically has been to the Swiss embassy as the interest section of the United States. And the message has been that this game is not something that you get into that. It's not your business, and you would be better to stay out of this game. It is only for the Israelis and either of the capitals, Washington, Paris, London, or the others. If they want to get involved, it would be a damage to them. So Iran is making it clear to Westerners that if they get involved into that, there are repercussions and the consequences would be against them as well, and they would be possibly the targets for Iranian missiles and Iranian retaliation if they want to get involved in one way or the other.
As far as Iran is concerned, would you say all the red lines have been crossed in these past 3 days, or is there still room for some sort of negotiated settlement here?
The Israelis are constantly attacking civilians and civilian areas. They targeted a market, a house appliance market today. And after, when the rescue forces were there, they bombed the place again and to take more casualties. They have been attacking houses and residential buildings from the earliest hours. They have continuing this. So they have already passed all the red lines. And when they pass these red lines, Iran needs to take serious actions against that.
Yeah.
The same model that was happening in Gaza and in Lebanon is being repeated by the Israelis here to take civilian casualties in order to frighten the Iranians and the people. However, it's not going to work like that. But anyway, the people are being killed by Israelis, and Iran needs to stop this war machine.
Let me ask you about the Americans here. We've seen and heard the statement from President Donald Trump that Iran needs to negotiate a deal on its nuclear program. Tehran, we know, has cancelled the 6th round of talks with the U.S., which was due to happen today in Oman. What will it take for the Iranians to return to the negotiating table?
There is no ground for any negotiations anymore. The negotiations were supposed to protect the Iranian nuclear program, ensure the rest of the world of its peacefulness, and to ease the sanctions against the Iranian economy. None of them is possible right now. The Israelis are attacking nuclear facilities. They have been clearly and blatantly supported by the Americans. President Trump has clearly supported them, and there is no ground for
So are you saying that there's no
avenue
for diplomacy at all?
I don't think for the time being there is any, unless the balance of power is reshaped again with the current military campaigns that is going on. Iran would bring Israelis to its knees, and when they admit the defeat, and then there would be time for negotiations about stopping the attacks and military campaigns. But until then, there is no ground for Iran to get to the table and be open to negotiations, because it would be translated into actually a weakness from Iranian side, and it would be in benefit for the Israelis.
Right.
And Iran is not going to accept that, because they would attack against Iran again in the future.
Okay.
President Trump urged Israel publicly to refrain from attacking, and yet Israel defied him. Whether he knew about the attack, apprised or consented, I don't know. Time will tell. So foiling the talks, I think from an Israeli point of view, was a bonus, but it was not from the way Israel sees it.
Okay, so what way does Israel see it? These attacks today that we're seeing on Iran, on the Iranian energy infrastructure, what is Prime Minister Netanyahu's political objective today? Is it deterrence? Is it degradation of Iran's capabilities? Or is it regime change in Tehran?
Well, it's a very good question, because A, he never stated his objectives. B, I doubt that he does have strategic political objectives other than degrade, as you correctly pointed out, Iran's capabilities. But, you know, if the idea is to eliminate, neutralize, or significantly degrade Iran's nuclear capabilities, you don't need to attack oil terminals or gas fields in Bandar Abbas. There are other ways of doing that.
Right.
And I think it is clear, Folly, that Israel cannot independently take out Iran's entire nuclear infrastructure.
I was going to say that, in fact, because everyone seems to agree that taking out the entire Iranian nuclear program is practically impossible. So if that's the case, what would be the attainable political end game for Israel in this conflict?
Well, you know, from Mr. Netanyahu's point of view, an attainable goal would be to drag the U.S. into this conflict, militarily and actively, because that's the only way he can, or the only way the Iranian military nuclear program and infrastructure can be hypothetically eliminated. But everyone is talking, and you yourself mentioned the possibility of a regime change. Now, regime change cannot be affected via air power. That's never happened. It's not going to happen now. For a regime change, you need two things to happen. Either the U.S. occupies Iran. Well, they had a very bad experience with Iraq, so they won't do that. And secondly, hypothetically again, that the Iranian population will rise and take and remove or dethrone the.
But so far,
leadership.
we're
I
not
don't-
seeing that on the contrary. We seem to be seeing a rallying of the flag, around the flag in Iran. I mean, let me just ask you, because we're running out of time, let me just ask you about what you said earlier about Prime Minister Netanyahu signaling the expectation of U.S. backing, that the U.S. will get involved at some point. But right now, we're not seeing that from the Trump administration. If Washington continues to withhold deeper military involvement in this conflict, what are Netanyahu's then next political or military options?
If the U.S. gets involved, then Netanyahu is out of the game as an active political player, because then it's up to the U.S. and the scope, scale, and extent of their military activity. I don't see that happening, as I think you're rightly just pointed to. But then again, we're talking about Donald Trump folly. I mean, he says one thing in the morning, another thing in the evening, and then the next day he moves on to Ukraine.
Right.
Within the span of 12 hours, he said, I had nothing to do with it. Then he said it was an excellent attack, more will be coming. And then he said, we need to end the war. So, if you can figure out what he means, I'd be indebted to you.
Okay.
I don't.
Let me just ask you, Mr. Pincus, before we let you go, about the mood within Israel, given the unprecedented scale of Iranian attacks we've seen on Israeli soil. Is Israeli society today unified behind